In this episode, we're talking to Marc Colburn about the technical interview and how to prepare. If you're looking for your first IT position, or if you're mid-career and want to become a stronger candidate, keep listening.
Do you want a career in cybersecurity? Are you unsure how to start? Curious what it means to be a cybersecurity professional? This is the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast with Dr. Jeff Colburn. He's a 30-year industry professional and the founder of Team Caveo, a company that specializes in helping people launch cyber careers. Join us on this podcast as we explore what it means to be a cybersecurity professional and how to get started. Welcome to the show.
Are you curious if a cyber career is right for you? Do you want to get into cyber and don't know where to start? Are you working in IT and looking to grow? Well, schedule a one-on-one cyber career coaching session with me to discuss where you are currently and how you can best move forward. Go to coaching.cyberjobhacks.com or click the link in the show notes to schedule your session today. Welcome, everyone, to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. Today, I want to introduce Marc Colburn. He's a senior level network engineer. He's worked in the industry for over 11 years, and he holds several certifications. He's also the co-developer of the Team Caveo training program, where we help people develop the knowledge and skill sets to start careers in IT. Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here. I'm excited to talk about this.
Awesome. So beyond, providing that technical training, something we always been kind of focusing on is how to provide the students those soft skills that's required to enter the job market. This include like resume development, job hunting, and, most people are familiar with this. However, there's one thing that's part of that recruitment process I think is unique to IT, and many people may not be aware of it. And that's that technical interview. This is something, both you and I are familiar with. We've been on both sides. We've been through the technical interview and we conducted technical interviews, and I lost count the number that I've been involved in. But for those who are not familiar, can you kind of explain how interviewing for an IT job might be different from interviewing for any other kind of job?
Yeah, and no worries. And like you said, been on both sides of it. I think one of the biggest difference, right, if you've maybe just white collar jobs in general too, versus that maybe you did restaurant work or something else beforehand, is that you typically find that these interviews not only may be longer, but at the same time you might have multiple stages. You may also see different categories of interview, right? So one big emphasis in IT is typically the technical interview. And sometimes that might be blended with cultural fit and whatnot, but I've seen it, both ways, right? So, the biggest difference there is just a lot of anxiety that people have around it is, well, what is this technical interview going to look like? How does this company conduct it, right? And it really just varies. So,
yeah. So, this concept of technical interview, this might be the first time somebody's actually heard of it. So can you kind of describe what is a technical interview?
Yeah. So, this is something that I think really truly evolves throughout your career too, depending on where you're at. Technical interviews that I had when I was first getting in the entry level don't necessarily look like the same technical interviews that I have today. And what I mean by that, is when I entry level technical interviews that I participated in, even ones that I interviewed candidates for. Sometimes you're not relying as much on people's past experiences and asking questions about that. You're more so have kind of a set amount of topics you're looking for. I've even seen people ask just trivia in cases. It could be something like, hey, what's this well-known word, or what's this? How do you sum up this, right? I think the ones that are probably the most valuable that I've done are typically whiteboard style interviews. Those are at least the ones that I've enjoyed being a part of and conducting myself. And even from entry level, there's value in asking an actual candidate to kind of either hop up on the whiteboard or you whiteboard as an interviewer, and then have them describe something, right?
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned the whiteboard. So are there different types of technical interviews? Like from your own experience? I know from my experience, I've gone through different types of technical interviews. What are some that you experienced?
Yeah, they look like all kinds of different form factors, right? So I mean, typical screeners. I mean, we have some people interviewing for jobs that you'll typically see like a phone screen, and this completely disadvantage depending on who's conducting the phone screen. I've had instances where a recruiter is conducting the phone screen, and you may answer something correct. The recruiter doesn't know that you answered it correct because it didn't match what they have on their script. Which is kind of a fun scenario. You can get yourself rejected that way. You'll make it past that screen. But other times it might just be a hiring manager who's trying to save other people's time on his team, because they go through so many interviews, so they might just do a front screening of you first. Aside from that, past that, we typically have in person. I know it's less and less now as more people are going remote or hybrid. But a typical in-person interview would be, typical conference room. You sit down, they might ask you questions. You might whiteboard. I've even seen labs, like I've had to do like hands-on coding in the middle as a technical interview, and even shifted. Like at one point, I'm doing coding at one point, and then the next hour I'm doing theory. Right? It's been all over the place. And then obviously now more and more remote, what I've seen is more of kind of going back and looking at people's resumes, asking specifically, talking about the networks they've worked on, because it's harder to kind of whiteboard and draw on the fly when everyone's remote. How about you? What are some things that you're seeing?
Well, yeah, it's now with this whole, everybody's working remote. It's all more, it's always through like Teams or Zoom or WebEx. It's I see more and more like this panel where like you're on with like 2 or 3 other people, and they're just firing questions at you, like technical questions at you. But honestly, I kind of miss the old in-person whiteboard experience. Just sitting there talking to a bunch of heads on a screen, can get tiresome. It's nice to have that interaction. I think sometimes too, at least in my experience when I was doing technical interviews in person, it tended to be more relaxed because you kind of have that chatter leading up as you're walking to the room, and before you really start. And I feel like with like the Zoom interviews, it's just like as soon as you're on, like that's it, you're right into the interview, and then pretty much when it's done, it's like, hey, thank you, or there's no no walking back to the exit chatter or anything like that, or like none of that. All that informal part of it is lost, which
I agree 100%. With the in-person interviews, I look back on some of them, and they're just good from just general networking, interpersonal networking, right? Not bad technical networking. Just you're getting to know people. You hear about maybe your interviewer's experience, right? I've had interviews I look back on even now, and just like, oh man, this guy really did some cool stuff in his career, and I wouldn't have known that if he was just an icon on Zoom, right?
Right.
All I got that from me was to sit down and talk to this guy and kind of just, see, why are you here? What are you looking for?
Right. And the other thing I miss too is like usually when I'm going in person, I get to see the location. I get to see the other people that are working. So I kind of get the vibe. I know, it's kind of weird to say, but you kind of get that atmosphere vibe by going in person. You kind of see, hey, is this a high energy group? Are these guys happy? Or is this just a miserable place to work? And you can, when you're in person, you can kind of pick up that vibe, which was, again, kind of lost on the Zoom.
Oh, yeah. And this is, something even outside of just technical interviewing, but interviewing in general within IT is, or any job really, is just, it's a two-way street. And entry level, we sometimes kind of maybe not always want to look at the red flags or ignore them because we want to get our foot in the door, right? So when you're first starting off, you're more likely to take a job that maybe isn't the best cultural fit for you. Or especially as you get more skills, more experience, you start being able to be more picky. You really got to treat interviews as this two-way street of you're interviewing them as well, and to your point, when you lose that in person, you lose kind of a key amount of data of like how dysfunctional is this organization I'm walking into? You know, are these guys all just eating and working through lunch, never talking to each other? You know, what's going on here? You know,
yeah, and also you could discover how bad the commute is, right? It's like, man, this commute was awful. Like going to the interview, it was like, do I want to do this every day? You know, just like there's some of those factors, like you said, you know, at entry level, you're kind of hungry to get your foot in the door, but you know, as you get a little more mature in your career, you kind of have the things that you're willing to put up with, the things you're not willing, and like sitting on like the highway for 2 hours trying to get into the city is definitely on my not want to do list. So not what I'm going to put up with list. So
exactly.
So what are some of your more memorable technical interviews?
Yeah, I have a few. I think one of the ones I'll talk about, because you know we're going to run entry level. I'll talk about one of those, and I'll talk about one that's more mid career for me as well. Kind of the most memorable ones I had was literally my first technical interview. Not including the phone screen. I passed a phone screen from a recruiter for my first IT job, and and then I had to do a cultural interview for this company, and it's a whole different thing we could go into at that. But you know, got the check mark for that, and was told, okay, well, you got to come here and do a technical interview now. And it was in person, with whiteboard, and at the time I only had like my CCNA, no IT work experience really, and so it was just three people just kind of drawing on a whiteboard, and it was really, how do these two computers talk, right? And then just they drew a switch in between them, you know, and they did some mock MAC addresses, right? And then, you know, we evolved from that to routing, and then, you know, dynamic routing protocols versus static, and it's got bigger and bigger until I couldn't really answer anything. Right. And so the reason why it's memorable for me is it really kind of shaped how I would later conduct technical interviews in my own career, and kind of the value I saw out of that, you know. And there's always, when you talk to people how to conduct interviews, there's a couple different ways that people do it. One of the common ones is, you know, drawing a computer, saying they're trying to go to Google, you know, what happens, right? That's always one. The other one I find is really this whiteboard that I just talked about, which is let's draw two pieces in a switch, and then let's keep building from there. And I always like that style a lot. So that one was kind of sat with me. You know, and just it's kind of being able to show that knowledge that I had. I thought that was a good way to showcase it. The other one that's kind of really memorable for me is a kind of a mid-level. A few years in my career, I was interviewing with Verizon's Intelligent Edge Network team, close to where I lived, and it was an interesting team in the sense that they had this group of software developers and network engineers kind of converging to a single team for a converged routing and auto transport team, but with a DevOps kind of methodology, right? And trying to write automation to fix problems with this network. And so the way they conducted the interview was, you know, they had to come in and in person, and they basically turned the laptop in front of me and said, hey, you got to talk to this API. I don't care how you do it. I don't care what IDE you use, right, to write this program that you're going to do. You got to talk to this API. Yeah, you ask me any question you want about it. And I said, all right, cool. And I was given like 20 minutes or something to do it. I was like, all right.
Yeah, no pressure there.
Exactly. And so then immediately after that, I get grilled for another hour on MPLS, you know, design and load balancing. And so, you know, basically one guy that first upfront interview, in the same interview, right, you know, you had one guy doing development testing, right, with me, like, can I write code? And I got like a 5-minute break to drink some water, and I come back and I'm immediately into network design.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, they were good guys. But, you know, I didn't see problems with that. I just thought that was a lot in one interview. You know, that always kind of stuck with me.
It's almost like a lab.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it felt like. You know, but they were good guys about it. You know, I didn't feel like they were trying to trick me or anything. They just like, hey, you gotta be able to do this, you know?
Right. So, you know, you mentioned, you know, just kind of like, you know, the different types of technical interviews you've been involved in. Like sometimes it's just trivia questions. Other times they're sitting you down and, hey, talk to the API. Like, so how do you prepare for a technical interview? Like, how do you know what what is your preparation process?
Yeah. You know, it's evolved throughout my career, but I mean, one thing that's always stayed consistent is, you know, at the very least, you know, you know, I'd say 90% of jobs you apply for, there's a description, right? You know, and so in there, I treat that like a syllabus. You know, like, okay, I got to know what's on here. and there's always arguments about, well, you don't need to know everything, even if you feel like you're a little underqualified, you still apply. But I treat, if I'm getting to the interview stage, I treat that like a study guide. Like I need to make sure I know those things. And so I usually develop kind of a study plan around it, depending on how much time I have, and going, well, okay, well, I know I've worked on, especially at this point in my career, I know I've worked on pretty much any of these technologies that people ask about. Or at least I've read about them at some point. And, so maybe I just need to refresh on these topics. So I usually make like kind of a matrix of okay, they want to know what, we'll say, dynamic routing protocols, they want to know what BGP and OSPF. And then I have to think about context of what type of network these guys are probably running too, because that's another part of it. What in BGP for an enterprise and what you might be asked for running an enterprise network is going to be different than what you get asked in a service provider network. So context kind of fuels that study as well of like, okay, well, who am I interviewing with? What kind of research can I do about this company up front? Even people, like sometimes I might know a person, but like, hey man, what do you guys work on there? And I'll feel that as a way of preparing my study plan of how I'm going to, how am I going to prepare for this interview?
Yeah. So it's almost like you're studying for an exam.
Yeah, exactly. I treat it like a certification exam, essentially.
So you take down the responsibilities and the qualifications, and you just study those.
Yep. And then if it's a bigger company like a Google or something like that, like they'll typically have information that they make publicly released, right? At one point I had interviewed for their background engineering team, and so I knew based on what I could find online, like what that they had done white papers on that backbone network. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to read those. I want to know about these networks that they were potentially working on. They were kind enough to put them out on the internet. I better go study that.
Right. Yeah. No, good point. You also mentioned like you conducted the technical interviews, meaning people came to you for a position. You actually conducted the technical interview. Just so our listeners know, what are some of the things that you were looking for in a candidate when you're conducting that technical interview, and how do you like to conduct those?
Yeah, I think one thing that I believe, and it's true even in a technical interview, even if a company does a separate cultural, is I won't recommend someone for hire if I don't think they're a good fit culturally, even if they might have the technical skill set. Right. So part of, and also about how that comes in, why that's important for technical interviews, that there's times where I found that being interviewed, that I may know something better than the person who's actually interviewing me might know it. And this is not an ego thing. It's just sometimes that's how it goes. Right. And so you play this game, of like, am I going to correct this person or am I not? Right. Is my ego important? Right. Can I set my ego aside? So as an interviewer, I have the same kind of thought process when I'm interviewing candidates. Like I've had people correct me before, even when it's not actually right. And there's times where they are right? Right. but then you have to think about the context of, what kind of job are they working? Are they going to be customer facing? Are they going to make an ass of themselves in front of the customer, constantly correcting the customer? So there's kind of a give and take, and even in a technical interview, always try to go with the right answer, but don't necessarily dive into an argument, right? With your interviewer.
Don't die on the sword for it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's okay to kind of check that ego.
Yeah.
And so, but things I look for, I don't want people to BS me on answers. If you think you know something, that's okay, right? Like I've been in interviews where people are like, don't even want me to guess. Like if I kind of remember this, like, they don't want to hear it from me. I'm okay with people guessing. Like, if the reality is we don't always remember everything 100%. You might remember it 60%. If you think you remember something in your interview with me, then make an attempt, right? But then maybe you say you're not sure about it. And pretty much almost everyone I've talked to in jobs that I've been in and who've done technical interviews, I've always been okay with a candidate saying, I don't know.
Right.
I prefer they say, I don't know, in scenarios instead of making a fake answer if they really don't know at all. The follow-up to that is, how do you figure it out? And I think that's really the difference is, like, if you say I don't know to everything, then obviously that's not going to work. You say I don't know to a couple things, and you talk about how you would figure out those answers or how something else might relate to it and how you'd build on that. Those are good, right? Like that's things that I want to see. Other things I really look for, it's just as general, like, interest in the role, right, in the company. I'm not saying you have to believe every single company, you got to passion about every single company's products and whatnot. But the reality is, I've done plenty of interviews where people don't even ask me questions. I'm like, this is one of your few opportunities to ask somebody about the company you're going to be working for, potentially how many years, right? Take the time. And I've heard counter arguments like, well, this might be the fifth person that person's talked to. I've already gotten the questions out. And my counter argument to that is, I think no matter who you ask, right, you might get a different answer, even if it's the same question. And I think there's a perception part of interviewing that's kind of like it goes back into me considering kind of like a game, right? Like high stakes game of your career here. And that if I don't ask somebody a question in an interview, if I end an interview, no matter how strong I might have done, and just go, okay, thanks, yeah, no questions, I'm ready to leave, I feel like I'm going to hurt my reputation with that person. People want you to ask questions, and I think I feel like even as an interview, I agree with that. Like, if you don't ask me a question, I assume you don't care. Right. In some degree, you're probably like, whatever. This is just another job. So come hungry, come prepared, and even if you feel like you can't think of a unique question for that person, try to just ask another question again. You might get a different answer.
Yeah, and that's such great advice, because I know, like, when I go through, especially when you become a senior level person, usually you just don't do one technical interview. They have you go through a series and interviews with people, and you get to ask questions. You might have duplicate questions. So what I typically do is based upon the role, and I will formulate questions based upon that person's role that I'm talking to. So, like, hey, we want you to talk to the account manager assigned to the account that you're going to be working on. So I'll ask account strategy questions, right? If sometimes the level I'm at, they have me talking to the CEO. Well, I want to know company direction. What's the vision? What's the growth plan, right? So, like, I come prepared with questions. Sometimes I might even know the answer, but like you said, it's perception, right? So I'm still going to ask the question because, like you said, I might get a different answer. I might get their perspective on the answer, because sometimes I know people that work there that I'm going to, that I'm applying for. So they already told me the answers, but I'm still going to ask the question because I want to show them generally interested. And I also got to agree with you with being honest. Never try to BS your way through a technical interview. I remember one time I was whiteboarding a design. They asked me to whiteboard a design I recently had done. And, and at the time, when I did this design, there was no real requirement for the routing protocol. Like, I could have picked any routing protocol because the customer there was no real design requirement to leave me one protocol over another. So I had used BGP. So the interviewer, right, the engineer asked me, said, well, why'd you pick BGP? I said, because I like BGP, right? That was an honest answer. If I've given the preference, especially for this data center network, his multi-site data center network, I was going to use BGP because I didn't have any other requirement to drive me in a different direction. So I was like, that's my answer. I like it. I used it. And
sometimes
they
those
accepted it
feelings
because I was
from
an honest answer. I wasn't trying to tap dance, talking about the pros and cons of one protocol over another. It's like, no, I have certain design preferences. If I don't have, a requirement leaving one protocol over another, I'm going to go with personal preference, right? So
and those preferences are built from experience too.
Yeah.
So if even if you don't go in those pros and cons right now, the reality is that we default to certain protocols
Right.
because we know as things change, what protocol would have made more sense,
right.
to handle dynamic networks. Like we talk about data center networks, PHP. I mean, all the vendors agree with you at this point too. Like, that's been the way to go.
Yeah, well, this would be a few years before, like, really that all kind of went that way. But
yeah, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. Is like that's the benefit of your experience, right? Is that sometimes we do have kind of like these preferences, and it's usually because we've got the bruises and scrapes over the years.
Yeah. Well, you've seen like bad design, like that's the thing. When I'm almost 30 years in the industry, I've seen so much bad design out there that people send me in to fix, and it's just like you sit there, you're like, why'd they do this, or why'd they pick this? This is horrible. But I don't want to go too far off topic here.
Yeah, exactly.
I can go down a deep rabbit hole. So thinking about listeners and people that are trying to get into their first IT position. and they maybe haven't gone through that first technical interview. What are some, besides what you mentioned, like what would be some of the recommendations you would make for that first timer?
Yeah. So I think, we talked about, I won't cover it again, the study, the research, right? And you can learn with the company, that's good, right? To do that, like we discussed. The other part, I think this applies to all interviews, not even just technical interviews, but really just professionalism. And I'll kind of dive into what I mean by that. The reality is, like I said, people don't always hire just, even though it's a technical interview, they won't hire you just based on technical skill. They'll hire you based on they like you, right? And you really, they form an opinion of you pretty quickly, right? Whether they realize it or not, there's a subconscious perception of you based on how you're dressed, how you did your greetings, right? And so, depending on how bad you might have messed up that intro, you might be more negatively judged throughout the technical interview based on. And so, I'll talk about one thing. I still think about this, and I joke around that I know it's the best memory. A lot of things throughout my life feel like I just raced through. But one thing I remember that's very mundane is that I was a deciding factor in hiring a candidate very early in my career for a network operations center role. And this candidate was a little bit older, right? I believe he was facing a little bit of ageism from some of the other interviewers. And so I was thinking about, how could I really sell this guy? Because I thought it was a good fit. And, at the time, the network operations center was changing because we're kind of a smaller company, no real tiering, stuff like that, into a tiered approach, more standard operating procedures, so basic documentation for people who are not familiar with that in IT context, and just overall, just adherence to policy, right, and procedure. And so this guy had actually showed up with, suit. I'll talk a little bit about the suit. I'll go off a tangent about that in a little bit. But he also had showed up with his own resumes, which I always recommend you should have copies of your own resume. But not even just copies of it. He had them in nice cardstock, heavy paper. And and I was like, this is very old school. And I thought about it. I was like, this guy really is someone who's attention to detail, just on that, right? And it's something that stuck with me, and I still think about it. And so I asked him. We eventually did hire him based on I was in the same boat, and I argued because I thought he was a professionalism, even if he wasn't going to be the greatest network architect in the world, right? I didn't see that as his career trajectory. I saw him as very professional, management kind of track kind of person, and just needed a chance, right? And so these were things that kind of stuck with me in his interview, was that, why so I talked to him, like, why did you have cardstock resumes? What was the motivation for you to do this? And he talked about an experience he had, because his previous career was like a service technician in a car dealership. And he said they used to just shuffle resumes, kind of throwing in the air, and because they'd have so many applicants, right? And then whatever resumes were still in the person's hand is what you'd go through. And so you really had to do anything you could to kind of stand out. Right. And part of that was having thicker resumes, right? They just look like you spent more time on it. Right. And it's these little touches, right, that I think really matter in perception. Technical skill set is 100% important. You're in a technical interview. But if you all know the same technical content that they asked, right? Am I going to go with a guy that went the extra effort, put on the suit, right, and then the cardstock? Or am I going to go with a guy that showed up in, the sweatpants and t-shirt, right?
T-shirt and
yeah. The reality is there's a perception game you play in every interview you're in. And I've had recruiters say to me for interviews, you don't need to wear a suit, and I've ignored that. and that might hit me, but I've always made a statement to anybody, even the recruiter, when they told me, I was like, look, I'm going to wear a suit, right? Because even though you're telling me I don't need to wear a suit, the guy because I've been an interviewer and I've been with little prep notice, I know that the guy who's interviewing me doesn't necessarily know that that's the standard, right? That I was warned. So I don't want that guy to perceive me as not caring because I was underdressing based on what someone else told me, right? So I always wear a suit for every interview I go to, no matter what. I even had people tell me to take off my tie. I'm like, no, I'm gonna leave it on. Right. It's just a perception thing for me. I'm gonna show that I am willing to sweat in this suit for you.
Right. Yeah. That's how much this job means to me. I'm willing to be uncomfortable.
Exactly.
So you mentioned resumes, and it made me think of how many times I've seen as an interviewer, somebody put something on their resume that they couldn't talk to. Like they put something like some kind of technical skill or some experience, and then when I asked them about it, they couldn't talk about it. Have you ever encountered that?
Oh, 100%. And I've actually been a victim of it myself in that I forgot to clean the technology off my resume. And I had someone ask me about it 10 years later. And I was like, you know what? I actually don't know that well anymore. And I had to talk about my experience with it, but I couldn't talk about it on a technical level anymore. And, that counts against you, right? But the thing I'll go back and say is, the reality is that for better or worse, people will judge you because they don't have a lot to go on. They'll judge you by anything in your resume. Right. And so if you put something down there, oftentimes they're looking for questions to ask you. And so they'll ask you about things that you have written. And, this might be the first time they've ever seen your resume. They've got 5 minutes to intake who you are as a person while they're talking to you as gradings and whatnot. And so they'll look and like, oh, this guy wrote down EIRP. Let me ask him about EIRP.
Right.
And if you can answer the questions on that, they all take those back, right? You write, I am a master of EIRP, and you can't answer questions about it, and you just hurt yourself, right? You try yourself in the foot.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I be right in the back of anything. I've seen people die on, in the process on basic, typos in a resume.
Right.
For better or worse, I'd be on the same hiring team as others, and you're talking about, and the guy I'm with, we're trying to evaluate the candidate we just interviewed. The guy who's with me is like grilling this guy because he made like one spelling mistake in the resume. Like, is it really that big of a deal? Right. It depends on the person you're interviewing with. Someone may non-select you because you made one typo. Yeah. So I always recommend have other people check your resume. Even and I've learned, like I said, I learned this mistake myself. Review the resume yourself every once in a while. Do you really still know those technologies as well as you think you do? Double check yourself.
Yeah, the other thing I saw with resumes is people trying to claim other people's work. And I'll give you a specific example. This one person was applying for an engineering position, and they, told me they had designed a certain network. So I asked them to whiteboard the network he designed, and he drew it up there. So of course I started asking him, the rationale behind his design decisions. Why'd you pick this protocol over this protocol? Why'd you summarize here versus there? And it was like a deer in the headlights. So I knew immediately it wasn't his design, because if you design something, you know why you do certain things. This guy was ripping somebody else's design and trying to claim it as his own. It's like that's going to get you killed in an interview, because no matter how well you answer my other questions, now I can't trust you. So now I was like, I can't trust this guy because he's trying to claim other people's work as his own. So it's just like these ridiculous mistakes was the things that'll get you tripped up in a technical interview.
Yeah, and the reality too is, like, if you're someone who's maybe mid-career, right, and you're starting to make the transition to architect level or even a senior network engineer when you have design responsibilities, and you may not have had those responsibilities before, we would talk about that, right? Like, maybe you didn't design this network, but you had an implementation project that was part of the network. Explain how you took a design and made it an implementation plan for how you handled migrations. The reality is that we all do. We all do design in some way, right? It just continues to scale as you get more senior, at least with the networking, throughout your career, right? And so even though you may not have designed, like in that case, that candidate, he may not have designed that network, but he may have designed an implementation plan and wrote his own implementation plan for some part of it. You would have been better served in that case just talking about that, Yeah,
you're trying to claim other people's work as your own because you're trying to get this position, but if I don't catch you in the interview, I'm going to catch you when you come on the job. Well, this guy can't design anything, right? So that's going to be a very short-lived career in that position. And it's not going to reflect well when you're applying for another position. So it's just
and the reality is, it's a small world. We it's not like everybody in this industry knows everybody, but there's a lot of times where, if you live in a certain area, you probably will interact with people who worked together before in some way, right? Yeah. And so your reputation is a lot in this, just like I'm sure any industry, right? But the reality is that, especially as you get more specialized, your reputation becomes more and more important because you probably have brushed elbows with plenty of people who have brushed elbows with the people you're interviewing with, So you definitely don't want to do anything that's going to make kind of a black stain on your name.
Exactly. It's like, it's it gets competitive the more you move up the ladder, and you don't want to make foolish mistakes that are going to get you knocked out of contention, right? Because like you said, you want to do those things that make you stand out in a positive and not in a negative, right? Because technically you might be neck and neck with somebody and they only have that one slot, and you want to be viewed upon in a positive light, not a negative light.
Yeah.
So, as we kind of wrap up this podcast, any other thoughts or suggestions around the technical interview?
Yeah, I think I'll take it. We actually kind of hit one of my points, and I'll just reiterate is, just be hungry, man.
Right.
Show interest in these companies. I know it's hard. Like my very first IT job, I applied. I treated it like a full-time job, trying to even get an interview. I applied to hundreds of companies. I had one call me back. It's hard to develop interest in 200 plus, 1,000, whatever amount of companies you might be applying to. But the reality is that the second you start getting an actual interest from that company, you have a recruiter reach out to you, that's when you really have to put that study cap on, start doing the research, start preparing, your study plan of how are you going to make yourself look good. And the reality is you may be asked questions you might not ever use while you're at that job. I've been asked trivia that was like, really? Like, this is what they want to know? But the reality is if you don't know in the interview, that it could hurt you. Despite the fact that you may never actually use that information in the job, which is unfortunate. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. And I felt earlier in my career, it was more often where I'd get these trivia questions. But point being, just kind of summarizes, do the research, show the general interest in that company, be prepared to ask questions that we talked about. Every part of this is a process. And then don't lose the easy points, right? And this is why I talk professionalism. Be personable, wear the suit, right?
Yeah.
Don't be a jerk, don't get argumentative. These are the easy, what I think should be the easy parts, right? The technical interview.
All right. Well, hey, Mark, I really appreciate your thoughts around technical interview. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Well, yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. Good talking about this stuff.
No, I really appreciate it. And, for everyone listening, we hope we found this conversation useful. If you're getting ready for that first technical interview, or hey, you're mid-career and you just want to learn how to be better, hopefully that you found this useful and informative. And until next week, I'll talk to you later. Do you want to be part of an online community of like-minded people? Join us at cyberjobhacks.com, where you'll receive the latest industry news, cybersecurity career trends, invitation to free events, and exclusive offers. So join our private Facebook group at cyberjobhacks.com.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please share with a friend who may be interested in becoming a cyber professional. Also, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, as it will shape our future episodes. Meet us here every Monday as we discuss the cyber job market and how to launch your career. Until next time, have a great week.